Do y'all remember how prevalent oceans and beaches were in the early 2000s and late 90s in media? I mean, that iconic ocean aesthetic that games at the turn of the century and right at the end of the 90s had. I think there's a lot of reasons why this aesthetic existed at the time, and I think one of the biggest reasons is that water was always a challenge to render. A lot of early games, like early 3D games like Tomb Raider or Ape Escape, really had static water where it was like just level that you would jump into and then you would move around with a water mechanic, or Quake is another good example of this. But at the turn of the century, with the incoming PS2 and Xbox and GameCube, this completely changed. Water could have waves, and the only thing harder to render than water is light rays, which we're kind of at that point now. But this era of game design where this ocean aesthetic was so common really stands out to me, especially at the start of the summer here, when I think back to the games of my youth. The first game I think of is Final Fantasy X, which obviously Spira is a very Peloponnesian based or inspired world, so there is going to be a lot of water. But I really think that a lot of the cinematics really show off the way that developers were trying to play around with water, and Squaresoft specifically was one of the big purveyors of this particular aesthetic. The opening of Final Fantasy VIII with that beach on the Liberi Fatale intro is a great example of this kind of playing around with water and trying to make water look good on the screen. Fun fact, I went to Hawaii 4 years ago, and I'm pretty sure I found that exact beach. I think it was Koala Bay, which actually is possible because Sakaguchi and Squaresoft had this Hawaii-based branch where they did a lot of game development in the late 90s and early 2000s, assuming my memory's correct. Please correct me in the comments below if I got something there wrong. I could have. It's been a long time since I read that story. But Final Fantasy X is the first game that comes to mind. It's not the only one, though. I think a lot of times people my age, the game they might think of is Kingdom Hearts, and the way that Kingdom Hearts intro and opening tutorial area is very beachy in the way that it looks, and it really does hone in on that same sort of aesthetic. And these are not the only games. It wasn't just Squaresoft that was doing this back in the day, as Nintendo also really put the power of the GameCube to work, rendering water mechanics, and vacation-y or ocean-based vibes. And the two games that come to mind for that are Wind Waker, The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker, which is all about sailing around from island to island hopping and solving puzzles. And then Super Mario Sunshine, obviously, that one is very much based on vacations and using water mechanics to clean the island. I mean, I haven't really played much of Super Mario Sunshine, but that's what I remember of the little part that I did. But what stands out more than that is the Isle Delfino and the way that it's very much Hawaii coded, in my opinion. And this is something that would continue very much into the very early 2000s. Vice City stands out as a purveyor of the same type of thing as well. The beaches in Vice City really stand out to me specifically because I played a lot of Vice City growing up. Vice City was my first real GTA game that I ever played a ton of it, and it really did stand out within that same core framework. And then there's two other games I want to mention here real quick before I talk about why I think this aesthetic was so common at the time. And the two other games are Crash Bandicoot Warped, which was right at the end of the 90s, and Sonic Adventure, also at super late in the 90s. The opening beach level, or the beach level of Sonic Adventure, really stands out, and I think a lot of people think of that one when they think of ocean aesthetics of the early 2000s and late 90s. And Crash Bandicoot Warped, there are so many water mechanic levels. The jet ski levels specifically really play with the waves of the ocean, and I remember thinking at the time that that was particularly interesting because it was something that not a lot of things were doing at the time. There was a couple things, like I think Wave Racer is the name of the game, that did the same type of thing, but it was not super common. But it is something that became more common as time went on, as more companies were trying to really flex their technical prowess by rendering water and playing into that kind of aesthetic. Now, I think that this trend in video games, it's not like it was every video game, but it was a lot. Like RPGs like Chrono Cross were doing it, platformers were doing it, open world sandboxes were doing it, lots of games were, racing games, lots of things were. So it was a definite trend of the time, and I would say it probably went from like 1998 until like 2002. That's kind of the range I'm thinking of. You know, a lot of it's 99, 2001 era, like Jak and Daxter really plays into that too. But I think it has to do with before that, in the very early 90s. You see, video game development takes a long time, and it takes a long time for ideas to get across to people. And it's usually, when you're talking about trends, video games are typically the thing that's hit last by the trend a lot of the time, in my experience. And if you look at 90s film and 90s ad campaigns, you'll notice a real big focus on vacationing and oceans and beaches. And there's one big thing for Australia that I'm thinking about here, and that's the Paul Hogan ad campaign, the thing that, at least stateside, United States side, that brought us the put a shrimp on the Barbie thing.
Come on, come and say g'day. I'll slip an extra shrimp on the Barbie for you. That's
kind of where that came from. It came from that ad campaign. I'm pretty sure, I'm like 90% sure. And I think that really did set people up to be interested in that kind of aesthetic, especially since most of the United States is not that. Even ocean areas, like coastal areas in the United States, don't match that aesthetic. Like, most of it isn't, so it kind of leaves a lot to imagination and to wanting to be there, wanting to disassociate with reality and go there. And this actually shows up in two movies I can remember from my youth. Two live action movies, I should say. One animated film and an animated cartoon. And the movies that this shows up in is House Arrest, which I think came out in 1996, Wild America, which I think was 1998 or 1999. And in these two films, one, House Arrest, ends, I believe, with a trip to Hawaii, and it's kind of like this big moment where that's the denouement or core resolution of the film. And then Wild America is actually a framing device for one of the characterizations of the characters in the film. And that's the mother who has been saving money to go to Hawaii, and then she gives her money to her kids so that they can get a video camera and go on their Wild America trip. And both of these really stick out in my mind because they have that, even though they're wildly not connected. And then video games also have that, and they're not connected. And none of them are connected to the Paul Hogan ad campaign. But then also, on top of this, it wasn't just that Australia ad campaign, because Hawaii was also getting more development during the 90s. And being a part of the United States, it makes sense that it would be a big cultural milestone that a state was being built up to be an international vacation destination. And I think the film that really stands out for this to me is Lilo and Stitch, coming out in the late 90s, which is right in this time frame. But then also The Weekenders, which is a cartoon from like 2000. I actually completely forgot about this until I started really writing down everything I could think of, because I only watched like a little bit of it growing up. But I think all of these cultural factors come together to create the traditional beach level and ocean aesthetic of that late 90s and early 2000s time period. It's not a coincidence that Squaresoft was one of the biggest companies of this time period when this aesthetic started to take over. I mean, they were at the top of their game at the end of the 90s. Final Fantasy VII, does not have this, not really. Well, it does have one place that shows this aesthetic off. But then that intro from Final Fantasy VIII, and then Final Fantasy X, Chrono Cross, all of these things, like it's very clear that like they saw this as a something they wanted to do, and a lot of other companies were seeing it at the same time. Midway was seeing this with a lot of their more racing games and things like that. And it's kind of an interesting thing to look back on now, how technology and what we can do with the technology completely informed a whole aesthetic for a whole generation of games for like a very significant time period. And I just want to pass it back over to you guys as well. What do you all think? What was the most iconic ocean aesthetic of this time period for you? What was the most prominent game that really honed in on this beach vibes and ocean, or trying to play around with water mechanics graphically and like gameplay wise? What game stands out to you? That's what I would like to know the most in the comments below. I hope you guys liked this video. This is one of my midweek Wednesday ones, just a short little thing where I share my thoughts on a random topic every week, and I thought this would be a good way to start out the summer. You've been watching Rayl Deal Games. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, let me know in the comments below if you have any other things you want me to talk about. I have a big month planned. I'm going to bookend this month with my massive review on the Final Fantasy Magic the Gathering set. And then I have loads of other things that I'm going to be talking about as well. Sometimes there'll be topics like this, and sometimes there'll be other things. If you like this video, consider subscribing and ringing that notification bell. And if you have a moment right now, maybe you would like some of my videos on the screen. Regardless of what you choose to do, thank you for keeping it real with Rayl Deal Games, and I'll see you all around next time.